Have you ever wanted to get started on your journey toward generational wealth without investing the time and the resources that it takes to develop a skill? You've heard about people telling you should start a business or you should invest in commercial property. You've probably also heard of the get rich quick methods claiming to allow you to be able to make over $100,000 in just 1 month. Well, I'm going to tell you about an even better way that will benefit you not only right now, but for decades and generations to come. So in 2014, I purchased my first home, and it was a big step for me because that home cost a lot more than what I was planning to spend on my first home. So I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised in the metro Atlanta area, and home prices in Georgia are a lot cheaper than what they are on the West Coast in California. Well, I was in the Navy at the time back in 2014, and I had recently been restationed to the West Coast. So I purchased a home out in California because at my first duty station, I was renting and I had got tired of renting. I grew up with a background of parents who were real estate agents. So I had real estate all around me since I was a kid. I understood the importance of owning a home and getting started along that journey as it was instilled into me by my parents. So I did not want to spend a large portion of my life renting. So I rented for my first duty station in Virginia, where I was first stationed. And then when I got restationed out in San Diego for my second duty station, I didn't want to rent anymore. I was like, I'm going to buy. Well, home prices in California are a lot more than what they are in Georgia. And so I knew this going in. So it was a big step for me to purchase my first home on the West Coast in California, where home prices are in some cases double what they are in Georgia. And so needless to say, I purchased my first home and I lived there for about 2 years. And after 2 years, I got restationed to another duty station. But rather than sell the home, I kept the home and decided to rent it out for the long term. That ended up being one of the best decisions that I made because I still own that home to this day. And that home is where the majority of my net worth sits. It has more than doubled in value since I first purchased it. So I'm talking about home ownership, but not just from the aspect of owning investment property. There are some things that you need to understand about owning a primary residence, which will actually set you up for an even better home ownership journey and investment portfolio. There's this thing called house hacking. And that's not what I intentionally set out to do when I purchased my first home and decided to turn it into a rental property. It actually wasn't house hacking at all. But there's a concept called house hacking that works along similar lines of living in a property and then renting it out and moving on to the next one. So to describe a little bit about what house hacking is, because this will help you understand what I'm going to go into next, that's really going to play to your benefit. So house hacking is a way in which you can purchase a home as a primary residence, and then you live in it for a year because that's the minimum amount of time that you need to live in it for that home to have truly qualified as your primary residence. But after that year, then you can move out and rent that home out as a rental property. So why would people want to do this? Well, the big main reason is because when you purchase a home as a primary residence, there are two benefits that you have over purchasing a home as an investment property. One, your interest rate is a lot lower when you purchase a home as a primary residence. Two, your down payment is a lot lower when you purchase a home as a primary residence. For example, if you purchase a home as an investment property, the typical down payment for an investment home is 20%. That can be a lot because even if you're only purchasing a $200,000 home, that's $40,000 that you need to come up with for the down payment. So you can just do the math on 20% of whatever price home is in your area that you might be looking at purchasing for an investment property. That's how much you would have to put as the down payment. Now, let's compare that to an FHA minimum required down payment of 3.5%. So if you purchase a home as a primary residence, your down payment requirement is only 3.5%. So that same $200,000 home that would cost you $40,000 as a down payment if you were purchasing it as an investment property, now it's only going to cost you $7,000 as a down payment when you're purchasing it as a primary residence. And that's a big difference between coming to the table with $7,000 for the down payment and $40,000 for the down payment. So that's one thing, is the down payment requirement. But two is the interest rates. So with the interest rates, you have higher interest rates when you purchase an investment property than when you purchase a primary residence. So when you purchase an investment property, sometimes you might have an interest rate that is 1%, 1.5%, 2% higher than what your interest rate would be if you were purchasing that same property as a primary residence. So these are the two big reasons. These are two big reasons as to why a lot of people house hack, because they can get homes as primary residences for less money with better interest rates. And if you live in them for at least a year, then it justifies you having truly had that home as your primary residence. And now you can rent it out, but you get to keep the same interest rate. You don't have to change anything with that mortgage. So you bought that home with a little money down, you lived in it for a year, and now you get to keep the same low interest rate that you had when you were living in it as your primary residence. And now you're using it as your investment property. Now, the second part to house hacking is that when you move out, you purchase another home and you repeat the process. And that's what house hacking is buying a home as a primary residence, living in it for 1 year so that you can benefit from the lower down payment and the lower interest rate. And then after that year is up, you rent the home out as your primary residence. And it doesn't have to be exactly a year. It could be a year and a half, 2 years, however long it takes you to be able to save up the down payment for purchasing another primary residence. But after you have lived in it for at least a year, then you rent that property out and you go and purchase another home as a primary residence. You live in that second home as a primary residence. That could be a little confusing because the second home is a totally different thing. You live in that other home that you purchased, the second house that you purchased. You live in that for a year and then you rent that out, and then you go purchase a third home. You go purchase a third property, and then you do the same thing as many times as you want to do it. And so this is actually a much better way of you being able to acquire rental properties while still taking care of your most basic need, which is shelter. You have to live somewhere anyways. You're going to pay to live somewhere anyways. You're going to pay a landlord rent, or you're going to pay a mortgage company or a lender mortgage payment every month. So why not get the benefit of having the home, which is also appreciating in value, because those homes on average over the last 60 plus years have appreciated at about 4%, a little over 4% year over year. So why not own something that's not only appreciating in value, but you're also going to be able to rent it out to where the mortgage payment that you have on that home is not even being paid by you. It's being paid by the people that you're renting the house out to. So they're paying your mortgage payment on a home that's appreciating, which you benefit from. And eventually that rent's going to continue to rise, because we all know that rent goes up on average 2 to 5%, depending upon where you live. You might be closer to 2 or closer to 5, but on average about 2 to 5% year over year is how much rent tends to increase. And so if you're renting, or if you're a landlord and you're renting out a home, you know that, hey, next year your rent's probably going to bump up a little bit. Your rent's going to go up and your rent's going to continue to go up, but your mortgage payment stays a lot more consistent. So you might have some, increases in your taxes, but that's not going to affect the overall mortgage payment as much as 2 to 5% would affect your rent payment every single year. So you own that home for long enough, eventually your mortgage is less than what your rent would be for the same property. And so this is one of the reasons why it's very much to your advantage to live in a property that you own again, and then once you move out of that, you can rent it out and go purchase it and do it again and again and again for as many times as you feel comfortable or want to do it, to acquire a rental portfolio. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment to say that there are a lot of people who believe that owning your own home is a liability and not an asset. For what I've just explained to you, I've described how it can very much be an asset to you to not only own your own home or own the home you live in, but by using this method, it is actually more advantageous to you in terms of you not having as high of a mortgage payment. So you're actually saving money and interest that you don't have to pay every month. And two, having that lower down payment, which means more of your equity, more of your cash that you have in the bank can stay in the bank. You don't have to dump $40,000 on a down payment to get a $200,000 home. You can purchase that $200,000 home for $7,000 under an FHA loan, or if you wanted to even do 5% as a conventional, you could purchase it for $10,000 as a conventional and still benefit from not having spent 40, but you only spent $10,000. So that extra $30,000 that you did not have to spend, you can utilize that to go and purchase more investment properties in coming years. So again, this is a very good method, but there are a few other benefits that I want to point out. When you own a home, you learn a lot about what it takes to own a home. When I purchased my first home in San Diego, I didn't know much about what it took to own a home. I knew that I had always lived in a home. Again, my parents have a history in real estate that has preceded my age. So my dad's been in it for over 40 years. I think he's coming up on his 44th year this year. And my mom's got over 30 years of experience. So she's been doing it not longer than I've been alive, but I'm 37 now. So I have no problem putting my age out there. I'm 37 now, but my mom's been doing it for over 30 years. My dad's been doing it for over 40, about 44 years this year. So they have a long, full history in the real estate market. So all I knew about homes, even though I had spent my whole life around it, and knew about buying and selling homes, but actually owning a home, I learned so much more in terms of maintenance, in terms of upkeep, in terms of taxes, supplemental taxes, and you just learn so much more when you actually own a home. I know a lot of individuals that say, oh, the home you own is a liability, but if you want an asset, you should just purchase a commercial property. But if you've never owned a property before, you don't know much about what it takes to own a home other than what you may have read in a book. But when you actually own a home, your experience of what it takes to own a home, what it takes to maintain and upkeep a home might be very different. So this is one of the reasons why I recommend actually owning a home and then renting out that home you own, and then you can move and go purchase another home, or just stay in that home and live in it. But then go purchase another investment property if you want to spend the higher down payment to purchase an investment property and build your rental portfolio that way. But the better way or the cheaper way to build it, actually owning that home, you're going to learn a lot about, the roof needs to be, maintained and upkept, leaves falling on the roof. And if you have trees that are nearby or sticks that fall on the roof, and that's sitting up there, is not going to be good for the lifespan of your roof. Things with your HVAC system, making sure that you keep your filters changed, little things about maintenance and upkeep that if you don't maintain and upkeep them, it will cost you a lot more money in the long run. These are things that you learn by actually being a homeowner. When you rent, there's a lot of stuff that you're shielded from because it's your landlord's responsibility. But if you plan to, at some point, own commercial property, or not even commercial property, just rental properties that on the residential side that you're just renting out to people who need a place to live, you should have a good idea of what it takes to actually own a home. And that would make you such a much better landlord, because you're not going to be renting out a home that's just going to be falling apart because you've only ever had a landlord who took care of everything. You've never needed to make sure that, the house stayed clean, or that the roof stayed clear, or that the yard didn't start coming up on the house too much to where now you've got an issue with bugs and infestation. And now you're hiring, pest control people to make sure that the pests stay away from the house. Termites, which is a thing in Georgia pretty much, but it might not be in, or you might have a different type of termite where you stay at, because there are different types of termites, or maybe you don't have to worry about it except for in certain times of the year, depending upon where you stay. But you learn about all of these things by owning a home. So another thing that you learn when you own a home, you learn about the neighborhood in which you are investing in. When you purchase a home for rent, that whether you are planning to rent it initially or at some point, when you purchase that home, if you actually live in that home, you learn a lot about the neighbors that are living in that area, in that community. You learn a lot about what's the community itself, the traffic patterns, the type of people that traverse in and out of the community, the neighborhood, even if things that matter to the neighbors that you would never be privy to if you never actually lived in that neighborhood. It might be a neighborhood where, people frequently speed through the neighborhood, and that's something that people don't like. And so if you are living in that neighborhood, this is something that you're privy to. The neighbors don't like the fact that a lot of people drive really fast through this neighborhood and it's not safe for children. Oh, there's a flag right there, because now you might be thinking ahead. Okay, so if I'm renting this out, a lot of people speeding through this neighborhood. It's not safe for children to, be outside playing in the streets, or, maybe you have, whatever the conditions are that are making this area not as, desirable to the people that live there, or is causing a nuisance to the people that live there. That's something that you're definitely going to pick up on, and something that's going to, be at the forefront of your mind when you're looking at renting this place out. Maybe there's an event venue that's nearby, and every week or every other week they're hosting events, and you can hear the noise from the event venue. Maybe it's close enough to the train tracks to where in the middle of the night you hear a train coming by on the horn, and it just wakes you up, or you hear the foundation of the house start to shake a little bit when those heavy trains come, whizzing by on the tracks and everything. These are things that you're going to start picking up when you are a homeowner living in the home, that even if you are planning to rent it at some later date, living in that home, you're going to pick up on those things so that you are aware of them, and you know them in your mind that, hey, these are some things that I need to look out for, so that when I start to rent this home, hey, I know about the price that I should be renting it at, because I know some of the things that the tenants might complain about. So you can better prepare your tenants for what they are going to encounter with this property. Because how many times have you rented a home or rented a apartment and then started finding out about all of the not so pleasing things about that property that you may have wished you were told up front? You may have wished, I wish that they would have told me about the noise. I wish they would have told me about all the sirens, or I wish they would have told me, about the smell. I didn't know we were that close to the sewer, or that close to a cesspool, or whatever it might be that's not pleasing. I didn't know that there was a club down the street, and that, many people frequent this club every Friday night and every Saturday night. And that's something that I just was not aware of, and I would have chosen another place. Probably could have did a little bit better reconnaissance before you decided on that place, at least for the club thing. But in some other aspects, we've all had, in most cases, lived somewhere where after we moved in, then we started discovering all of the unpleasant things about where we stayed. There was one condo that my wife and I rented out at my first duty station in Virginia, the first place that we were living at in Virginia. The gentleman that we rented it out from, at first, everything seemed fine. It seemed cool. But then we started noticing, those little things that, kept coming up. There was, a leak here, a leak there. And then, there's one time where, the wall all of a sudden is just starting to get wet, and it's like, oh, we've got a leak behind the wall, and then you touch the wall and it just crumbles. And it's like there's this leak that's been going on behind the wall, and we don't know about it until all of a sudden it shows itself through the wall when we start seeing the wall getting wet from the backside, and then the wall just crumbles in. And so come to find out later, the guy that we were renting from apparently just had been told by the gentleman that he uses as his plumber or as his handyman to fix a lot of his stuff, that he needs to use better quality materials when he's fixing things. However, the gentleman we were renting from, he was more of a, what's the cheapest option that I can do? Basically just put, a Band-Aid on it, put some tape on it, whatever it might be, and let's get someone else back in this thing so I can get some more rent money. And then all of a sudden, we're now dealing with those issues and we're breaking our lease early. Thankfully, we didn't have to pay anything extra because the property had so many issues with it. There was a dead rat in the wall as well that we saw when the wall crumbled down. It was just so many issues with the place. But in any case, everyone has a story at some point, or most people do, at least, of some place where they've lived. And after having moved in, they started discovering all of the unpleasant things with living there. And that's something that when you are a homeowner who's planning to rent out your home at a later date, you discover all of those unpleasant things about your property, and you can fix it, you can remedy it. And then the things that you're not able to fix and remedy, i.e. the train tracks or the trains that can be heard as they pass through on the train tracks, or the event center that's down the street that you can hear the loud noise in them, or the neighbors that just keep blasting their music all the time. Whatever it is, you discover those things. But now when someone comes to rent your property, you can tell them about it. Don't let this be something that you just spring up on them and all of a sudden, oh, they just find out about it after they move in. Like, you can tell them about it. They're prepared for it. And then when they move in, it's not unexpected, or it's not a surprise for them. And because it's not a surprise for them, they can have a much better experience having rented out your property because they knew beforehand, this was what I was getting into. He told me before about the trains. I was okay with that. He told me about the noise. I was okay with that. He told me about whatever it was, and I still was okay with that. And so preparation and preparing your tenants mentally for what they're going to encounter goes a long way in terms of your tenants being happy, your tenants wanting to renew the lease where they're at, rather than them feeling like, you know what, they knew all of this stuff before I moved in here and they just didn't tell me. Now I'm a little bit suspicious about them. Now I don't know if I can trust them. These are some of the thoughts that start building up in tenants' minds when you're not upfront with them and forward with them about some of the things that you know might be an issue for them living in that property. So again, when you're living in a place, you get to discover all of these things in addition to actually learning about what it takes to properly maintain and upkeep a house and some of the cost in repairing that home. So these are some of the benefits that you get when you actually own a property before renting it out. But in terms of building the generational wealth, in my opinion, it is unmatched, the value that you can get from buying a home, living in it for 1 year, moving out, buying another primary residence, living in it for a year, moving out, buying another primary residence, living in it for a year. In 5 years, 6 years, you can easily have 3, 4, 5 properties that you own, all with low interest rates because you lived in all of them for 1 year. Now, if you've got a family with kids, it might be a little bit tougher for you to do, but hey, maybe you're the person that's like, you know what, my kids can deal with it for 3 years. We're going to acquire 2 properties in 3 years. Or they can deal with it for the next 5 years, and we're going to get 3 properties or 4 properties over the next 5 years. And that's it. We're going to live in the 5th one. That's going to be the one that we're going to make our long-term home. And then we would have acquired 3 other rental properties or 4 other rental properties. And so now we have our primary residence, and we've got 4 other rental properties in our rental portfolio that we can now rent out. Those renters are paying our mortgage, and building our wealth and our equity. Because as I stated earlier in the podcast, the first house that I bought, which I still own, is where most of my equity sits. It's where most of my assets lie, net worth, whatever you will. Is in equity in the house, because the house has continued to appreciate over time from 2014 all the way up to where we are now. And it's just continued to appreciate and get more and more and more and more valuable, as most homes across the US have over that decade. And so having purchased that early and then having been renting it out ever since I moved out of it, I haven't been paying the mortgage. The renters have been paying the mortgage. The rent, in accordance with the fair market rental value of the area where the home is located, has continued to go up and up and up. So our rent has gone up, but our mortgage payment has actually gone down, because when we bought the home in 2014, we bought it at a one interest rate. I forget the exact interest rate of what I purchased it at. But when 2020 rolled around, interest rates dropped to 2%, 3%. So what did we do? We refinanced it and got a much lower interest rate. So now our payment dropped about $300 or $400. So now we've got rent that has been going up, but our payment dropped. So rent's tracking along with the fair market rent value for the area, but our mortgage is not attached to any fair market rental anything. It's attached to whatever the interest rates are at the time when we decided to refinance, and they were really low in 2020 and 2021. So we refinanced and we got a much lower interest rate. So again, it was to our benefit so much to just not only purchase that home, live in it, get it as that primary residence, but also to keep it and maintain it as a rental property. This is something that is a much better way to start building that generational wealth. One thing that I want to present to you is an idea. I want you to think for a minute, how different would your life be if, when you became an adult and were ready to branch out on your own, your parents gave you a property mortgage free for you to just have? You could live in it if you wanted to, or you could rent it out. And if you rented it out, you could take the money that you receive from the rent and use that to pay for wherever you did want to live. Because again, that property they gave you is mortgage free. And this is where I get into the generational wealth aspect of it, because those properties are only going to have mortgages for as long as they have mortgages, assuming you make the minimum required monthly mortgage payment. At the most, those properties should only have mortgages for 30 years. But there are ways where you can get those properties paid off way sooner than 30 years. So by the time your children are ready to branch out on their own, how does having a home with no mortgage free you to be able to go and live your dreams? How does that allow you to be able to pursue the things that you are passionate about without having to worry about working a job you dislike just so that you can take the money from that job and use it to pay bills and give to a landlord? How much does it change your life if that's the situation that you walk into when you're ready to branch out and go out on your own? So now think about if you get that same thing in process, that same thing in place for your children. If you start acquiring a property as a primary residence now, and you learn everything about home ownership while living in that primary residence, and then after a year or 2 years, or however long it takes you to save up enough to purchase another property, then you rent that one out and go purchase another one. And after a year or 2 years, you go and purchase another one. You might be like, that sounds like a lot of moving. Well, most people don't live in the same place for 5 or 7 years, even if you're renting. A lot of people don't rent a home and just live in that home that they're renting for a decade. They might live there for a couple years and then they move on. But rather than doing that for a rental property, you could do it for a home. And you could purchase a home, rent it out for a couple years, or excuse me, live in it for a year or two. And then after that, you move out and then you rent it out for the rest of the time. And check this, you can still purchase another property because the way that the mortgage guidelines are written are that you can utilize a portion of the money that you're receiving in rent or that you will receive in rent. You can use some of that money to help you to count as your income, which will help you qualify for the next property. So just to state that again, if you're living in one property as your primary residence, you can keep this home, you move out, you rent it, and you move out and rent it out to go and purchase another primary residence. Now you still have this mortgage. However, you can use a portion of the money that you're receiving from renting out this property now to offset the mortgage, so that now you don't have the debt of this mortgage hurting you from being able to purchase another home. And so this is a great way for many people to start building that generational wealth without having to have $40,000 in the bank, without having to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to go purchase an apartment complex, without having to spend who knows how many hours it would take you to master a skill, or the resources that it takes for you to, master a discipline that will allow you to then go and make whatever money that discipline or that skill will bring you. This is one way where you can purchase a home. Again, it costs you the closing cost and the down payment and maintaining and upkeeping the home, but you're going to have to live somewhere anyways. So you're either going to give the money to a landlord or you're going to invest it in yourself and in your future and in the future of your children and their children by maintaining these properties, so that, as the property's wealth continues to grow, maybe you don't even give the property to your kid. Maybe when your kid gets ready to go off to college, you've got a fleet of 3 properties, 4 properties. You can sell one and pay for your entire kid's college tuition, and they don't have to come out of college with $100,000+ in student loans, because you wisely started off by purchasing a home, living in it, purchasing another home, living in it, and now you had these homes that were appreciating. You purchased it at $200,000. By the time your kid gets ready to go off to college, that home might be worth $300,000, $350,000. And so now you've got $150,000 of equity in it. And you could have more than that, because over that same time period, it may have appreciated $100,000 or $150,000, but you've also been paying down on the mortgage, which means that you've gained $150,000 in value, but you've been paying down on the mortgage throughout that entire time. So you've got more than $150,000 of equity. So now you're in a great position to be able to make some moves. Hey, my kid's going to college and these next 4 years is going to cost X amount of dollars. I could sell this house, cover my kid's whole tuition. And I didn't even have to pay the $100,000 into that house. My tenant paid for the mortgage. You see how that works? And so these are some of the things that I'm presenting to you, because I believe this is a much better way for people everywhere to be able to start building that wealth. But let's just say that owning an investment property is not something that's on your radar right now. That's cool. Start off by just owning the home you live in, because there's just going to be a lot of benefit and value there. It's not a liability. A lot of people have you thinking, oh, it's a liability because it's not making you money. Liabilities are not everything that does not make you money. There's a lot more value that can be provided to you outside of just financial value. Money is not even the most valuable thing in your life. I mean, time is more valuable, family is more valuable, health is more valuable, but there's some other things that also you get from owning the home that you live in that also can provide value to you. There are memories that are obviously created, a place that you own and have ownership in. There's a sense of pride that you feel in that. There is the wealth that's being built up in the home through the equity, because again, that home is appreciating in value, but also you're paying down that mortgage, which is creating equity. And in terms of, hey, at some point, you may want to move on and purchase another home. However, this home has all this equity in it, and you could rent it out for more than enough to cover the mortgage. So now this home becomes the asset for you where you can cash flow it and receive cash from it. So again, not everything that's costing you money, I don't see it all as being a liability, because I don't see money as being the only thing that carries value. There are a lot of other things that carry value. And so wanted to leave you with that. Hopefully this has been able to help you and give you some perspective on a better way that you can generate wealth and start building generationally some things that are going to help you now, because you need to have a home to live in right now, but for decades to come as that wealth continues to grow and build as well. So take care, be blessed. We'll see you in the next episode.